Where am I?
Think your life is hard? Take a deep breath, because you wouldn't last a single day in medieval times. Forget modern courts, lawyers, and humane sentencing. Here, even the tiniest misstep could spiral into a nightmare of pain, humiliation, and horror that would make your worst fears seem like a spa day. Could you survive this? Let's find out. You wake up in a damp, cold cell. There are smells of mold, human waste, and despair. Your stomach growls not from hunger, but from the gnawing terror that something worse is coming for you today. Medieval punishments weren't just about keeping law and order. They were designed to terrify, humiliate, and sometimes linger for days or weeks. Unlike today's swift, sanitized justice, the Middle Ages thrived on suffering. Your day begins with the sound of iron doors clanging, chains rattling, and distant screams echoing through the stone corridors. For most commoners, misfortune wasn't a rare visitor. It was a constant companion. A single accusation, stealing bread to feed a starving family, speaking out of turn, or even being in the wrong place at the wrong time could land you here. And here, the line between punishment and prolonged torture is almost non-existent. Could you endure this environment without losing your mind? Let's start with a typical morning in medieval justice. First, there was the trial, if you were lucky enough to call it that. More often, legal proceedings resembled a game of chance stacked against you. Judges weren't impartial, they were often local nobles with personal grudges, and law was a fluid concept. A simple accusation could lead to days of waiting in grim dungeons, where rats nibbled at your toes and lice crawled through your hair. The air is thick, suffocating, and every breath tastes like decay. You try to close your eyes, but the thought of what's coming makes sleep impossible. Could you survive the anticipation? If the charges were serious, or sometimes, if the wrong person felt offended, the medieval legal system had a terrifying arsenal of punishments. Some were designed to humiliate before they killed, others to inflict excruciating pain slowly, and some were just plain inventive in cruelty. Imagine being restrained in a way that you couldn't move, while someone methodically applied instruments designed to bend your bones, tear your flesh, or ignite unbearable sensations. Could you endure this without screaming? Or would your own survival instincts betray you? Now, let's talk about the early stages of punishment. Before the gruesome public spectacles, many accused would experience humiliation in private. Stocks and pillories were common wooden frames designed to trap your hands, head, or feet. You were forced to sit or stand in agonizing positions for hours, sometimes days, exposed to the elements. Rain soaks you to the bone. Winter winds slice through your tattered clothing. Passers-by throw rotten food, mud, or worse. Imagine trying to endure hunger, cold, and the incessant sting of human cruelty, all while bound like an animal. Could you survive a single hour? For more serious offenders, the rack awaited, a horrifying device that stretched your body, dislocating joints and slowly tearing ligaments. You're secured with iron chains, and every movement stretches you further into pain that feels endless. Some records speak of individuals being tortured for hours, sometimes days, before confessions were wrung from their bodies. And confessions didn't guarantee mercy. Often, the accused would be executed anyway. Could you survive the unrelenting agony of your own body betraying you? Not all punishments were about physical pain. Some inflicted psychological terror designed to linger long after the act. The ducking stool, often reserved for women accused of gossip or petty misdeeds, forced victims into freezing water repeatedly, sometimes for hours. Hypothermia wasn't uncommon, and the sheer terror of drowning, again and again, drove many to madness. For the medieval mind, endurance was as much about fear as flesh. Could you maintain your sanity in this relentless psychological assault? Food, hygiene, and daily survival didn't get any easier. While imprisoned or awaiting punishment, your diet was meager at best. A crust of stale bread, thin gruel, and contaminated water was standard fare. Rats, lice, and fleas were constant companions. You're trapped in a world where even the most basic comforts, warmth, rest, nourishment are denied, amplifying the pain of whatever punishment awaits. Every meal, every bite, feels like a reminder that death isn't the only horror here. Could you survive days of relentless deprivation? The environment itself becomes a punishment. Medieval dungeons were dark, damp, and airless. The stench of human waste mixed with mold, rotting wood, and the remnants of those who came before. Some prisoners were held in solitary confinement, a form of torture that modern psychology tells us can break the mind far more efficiently than physical pain. Your senses warp in the darkness. Time stretches impossibly. Could you endure such isolation without losing your grip on reality? Moving beyond the dungeons, public punishments awaited those deemed guilty enough for spectacle. The medieval justice system loved a crowd. Hangings, floggings, and mutilations were social events townspeople gathered to watch, cheer, and sometimes participate in the humiliation. Imagine standing in the town square, bound and bleeding, as your torment is part of someone else's entertainment. Could you survive this spectacle without screaming or fainting from sheer terror? Let's not forget execution as performance. Hanging was sometimes quick, but not always. If the rope was too long or amias tied, strangulation could take agonizing minutes. Beheadings required skill. A poorly wielded axe left survivors writhing. Drawing and quartering, disembowelment, or breaking on the wheel, these were not just punishments. They were messages to the entire town. Fear is power. Could you face death and still think clearly, or would panic claim you first? Even for those who weren't sentenced to death, medieval punishment often meant permanent disability or disfigurement. Cutting of hands, ears, noses, or tongues was not uncommon for theft, slander, or rebellion. You might survive, but life would never return to normal. Daily labor, food preparation, or even walking could become impossible. Imagine the shame, the constant pain, the whispers of townsfolk. Could you survive in a body and world so cruelly altered? And then there were punishments specifically designed to blend pain, humiliation, and disease. Some devices exposed victims to the elements while restraining them: chains, iron cages, or the infamous gibbet. Starvation, thirst, frostbite, or heat stroke became part of the sentence, extending agony for days or weeks. The ingenuity of medieval cruelty knew few bounds. Could you endure this combination of nature and human invention without giving up completely? This is just the start. The first for pillars: morning life, historical context, daily labor and hygiene, and early survival challenges already paint a terrifying picture. And yet, the true horrors, the ones that would make even the bravest modern person shiver, are just beyond the dungeon door. You felt hunger, cold, fear, humiliation, and anticipation. You faced the grotesque realities of medieval law before the public ever sees it. And still, the worst punishments, the ones designed to linger in memory as a form of ultimate terror, are still to come. Could you survive what's next? By now, your stomach twists, your heart races, and your mind starts imagining the unspeakable things awaiting the accused. But there's no turning back. Medieval justice was unrelenting, immersive, and personal. Even the rumors of certain punishments, iron cages, the breaking wheel, or the rat torture were enough to make the bravest soul tremble. Could you survive knowing your body might betray you before your mind does? The first part of this journey has introduced you to what life in the medieval legal system felt like: the damp cells, the rats, the starvation, and the anticipatory dread. You've glimpsed the mechanisms of psychological and physical terror, the way even small punishments could erode body and mind. You've begun to understand why even the accused, who technically survived, often did so with broken spirits. Next, we'll dive deeper into the most gruesome medieval punishments, exploring the methods designed to linger long after death seemed preferable, the rare exceptions of survival, and the creeping psychological horrors that haunted towns and minds alike. Brace yourself, part 2 will confront tortures that would make your blood run cold and test whether your modern self could survive a fraction of this medieval nightmare. Cell door slams open, chains scrape against stone, and your heart lurches. Whatever scraps of courage you've held on to dissolve instantly. You're about to learn the true meaning of medieval punishment: not just humiliation, not just fear, but agony craft as an art form. Could you survive what's coming? The guards drag you out, iron shackles biting into your wrists. Townsfolk already gather in the square, hungry for spectacle. In the Middle Ages, pain was public theatre. The crowd wanted to see suffering, to smell the blood, to hear the screams that would echo long after the condemned had fallen silent. And what awaited you? Some punishments were so grotesque that death almost seemed merciful. Take the breaking wheel, for example. Imagine being lashed to a giant wooden wheel, your limbs stretched across the spokes. The executioner swings an iron bar down on your arms and legs, shattering bone with sickening cracks. One blow at a time, your body twists unnaturally, bent into positions no human frame should endure. Some victims lingered for hours, even days, tied to the wheel, their crushed bodies left as a warning. The crows circled overhead, waiting for their feast. Could you endure your body being turned into a grotesque sculpture of pain while still conscious? Or perhaps you'd face flaying, stripped naked, bound tightly, and surrounded by jeering crowds. The executioner would slice into your flesh, peeling the skin from your body in long, deliberate strokes. The air stings like fire against your exposed nerves. Every movement feels like 1,000 blades. Sometimes the skin was nailed to a wall as proof of justice. Death was certain, but not immediate. Could you survive knowing every nerve in your body screamed until the very last breath? And then there was boiling alive. Picture a massive cauldron set over fire, filled with water, oil, or even molten lead. You're lowered slowly, your screams mingling with the hiss of bubbling liquid. Flesh blisters bursts, and sloughs of woe while the crowd gasps in both horror and fascination. Unlike quick execution, this was designed to draw out every second. Some justice systems even used flavored liquids like wine or milk, turning your suffering into a grotesque feast. Could you survive even the first few seconds before shock overtook your senses? But medieval horror wasn't always about fire and iron. Sometimes it was about nature itself, twisted into a weapon. Consider rat torture. A prisoner would be bound beneath a cage of hungry rats, and the cage would be heated from above. The terrified creatures, desperate to escape, burrowed downward through you. Screams filled the chamber as the rats clawed and chewed their way into flesh. Could you survive knowing your own body was being hollowed from the inside out? As horrifying as these punishments were, the medieval mind also sought justice through medicine, if you can even call it that. Doctors believed that pain could purge sin and illness. Leeches drained blood in the name of balance. Boiling herbs were forced down throats to cleanse the spirit. Some punishments doubled as medical cures. Imagine being bled nearly dry, not for health, but to weaken you before the final act. Could you survive medicine that felt more like a prelude to death? The infamous ordeals also blurred punishment and belief. Trial by fire, where you walked barefoot across burning coals or held a red-hot iron. Trial by water, where you were bound and tossed into a river sink and you're innocent. Float and you're guilty. The logic was twisted, cruel, and inescapable. If you sank, you drowned. If you floated, you burned. Could you survive a system where fate itself was rigged against you? Now, let's talk about the Iron Maiden. Though historians debate its widespread use, legends of the spiked coffin became symbolic of medieval cruelty. You're forced into a narrow chamber lined with sharp iron spikes, each carefully positioned to pierce flesh but avoid instant death. The door slams shut. You can't move without stabbing yourself further. Darkness closes in. Blood drips. Air grows scarce. Death is slow, suffocating, and suffused with agony. Could you survive a tomb that made your own body the instrument of torture? And then there was the pear of anguish. A metal device shaped like a flower bud was inserted into the mouth, rectum or vagina, then expanded by turning a screw. Flesh tore, muscles ripped, and humiliation cut as deeply as pain. It wasn't just physical torture, it was designed to strip away every shred of dignity. Could you survive this intimate, invasive brutality while the crowd watched your humiliation? Public executions weren't just about ending lives, they were performances of terror. The condemned often faced multiple stages of agony before death arrived. Drawing and quartering was the ultimate example. First, you'd be hanged, but not long enough to kill, just enough to choke. Then, while still conscious, your body was cut open, organs pulled out, and displayed before you. Finally, your limbs were tied to horses and torn apart, each piece paraded as a warning. Could you survive even the thought of being dismantled piece by piece? Sometimes the punishments were aimed less at the body and more at the mind. Branding and mutilation turned survivors into walking reminders of crime. A thief might lose his hand, a liar his tongue, a blasphemer his ears. Imagine walking back into your village, marked forever, shunned by neighbors, incapable of working, begging for scraps. Could you survive the endless shame that followed every glance? Even punishments that seemed mild were nothing short of horrific. Floggings tore flesh from bone. Tongue piercing left permanent scars. Shackling in cages meant days of starvation, exposure, and ridicule. Everything was designed not just to punish, but to break spirit, body, and reputation. Could you endure a world where your worst humiliation wasn't private, but the town's favorite pastime? The terrifying part. Many of these punishments weren't for murderers or hardened criminals. They could be inflicted for theft, gossip, heresy, or simply offending someone of higher status. In a society built on fear, the line between punishment and entertainment blurred until it vanished entirely. Hey, as you imagine yourself dragged back to the dungeon, your body broken, your mind fractured, ask yourself, could you survive this chapter of medieval justice? Or would the anticipation alone the crowd's eyes, the executioner's grin, the knowledge of what's coming be enough to crush your spirit before the first blow landed? You're not done yet. We've seen flesh torn, bones shattered, and lives ended in spectacle. But the horrors go even deeper. In Part 3, we'll explore war, siege punishments, rare tales of survival, and the psychological scars left behind by a society obsessed with pain. These weren't just punishments worse than death, they were warnings etched into the very soul of medieval life. Brace yourself. The worst is still to come. If you thought the dungeon, the rack, and the boiling cauldron were the pinnacle of medieval horror, think again. War, conflict, and societal terror ensured that even the mere act of survival could feel like punishment. The Middle Ages were not kind to civilians or soldiers, and those unlucky enough to fall into both categories often experienced brutality that would make modern nightmares pale. Could you survive the chaos of a battlefield where mercy was myth and death came in slow, agonizing doses? Picture the siege of a fortress. You're trapped inside stone walls with hundreds of others, food dwindling, water fouled, and disease lurking at every corner. Rats and vermin infest the corners where children once played. Hunger gnaws at your stomach like a predator. Starvation, they say, is slow death, but the mind races faster than the body can sustain. People ate anything. Cats, dogs, even fellow humans when the last ration failed. Could you survive the moral and physical torment of watching your neighbors disappear one by one, forced to consider unthinkable acts just to remain alive? Outside the walls, armies patrol like monsters in the night. Soldiers ravage the countryside, stripping homes, slaughtering livestock, and burning crops. Villagers are dragged from their homes, forced to work, beaten, or executed on the spot. Even if you survive the initial attack, disease and exposure lurk. Dysentery, plague, and typhus strike with little warning, killing far more than swords ever did. Could you endure a life where every moment outside your door is a potential death sentence, where even a scratch could mean a painful, infected end? For those unfortunate enough to be captured by the enemy, the punishments could be personalized forms of torture designed to break body and spirit. Prisoners were often ransomed. Yes, but not always. Some were executed slowly. Others used as human shields or forced into servitude under grueling conditions. Being pressed to death under heavy boards, left to starve in cages, or subjected to repeated humiliation became the grim lottery of war. Could you survive the knowledge that your very existence might be manipulated for someone else's amusement or survival? Rarely, however, exceptions existed. Some individuals did survive the worst the Middle Ages could throw at them, though not without lasting scars. Chronicles tell of prisoners who endured weeks of torture, escaped during the chaos of battle, or were ransomed back to life. One famous case involved a man condemned to the breaking wheel who somehow slipped his bonds during the execution as distraction and fled into the night, scarred but alive. Another recounts a woman accused of witchcraft, subjected to trial by water, who miraculously sank and was declared innocent, though villagers never let her forget the terror. Could you survive against odds that seem mathematically impossible, clawing back your life from the jaws of medieval death itself? These rare tales, however, were exceptions. Most lived or died entirely at the mercy of circumstances. The psychological toll of this world is hard to overstate. People existed under constant fear, knowing any misstep could result in a public execution or mutilation. The threat of disease, hunger, and violence created an environment of chronic stress, shaping minds accustomed to dread. Could you survive the mental strain of walking each day in a world where fear was a constant companion, and hope was fleeting? Children were not spared. Apprentices, page boys, and peasants' children faced brutal conditions. Sent to work in forges, fields, or homes, they endured physical labor and cruelty from masters or parents alike. Education was often a matter of survival, not learning. Misbehavior could lead to corporal punishment or worse. Could you survive childhood stripped of safety, play, or comfort, trained instead in the art of enduring pain? Even the relatively lucky nobles and wealthier citizens lived with dread. Rebellion, accusation, or political intrigue could result in imprisonment or violent death. Power could not guarantee safety, only delay the inevitable. People became masters of negotiation, bribery, and strategy just to prolong life, knowing that the next twist of fortune could overturn years of careful survival. Could you survive in a world where your only defense against death was cunning, connections, or wealth, none of which guaranteed safety? The environment itself became an executioner. Harsh winters, summer plagues, and famine claimed countless lives. Crops failed, rivers froze, and blizzards killed as easily as spears. Medieval people learned that survival was not about strength alone, but timing, luck, and resilience. Could you endure nature itself as a relentless, uncaring torturer, indifferent to your screams or struggles? As Part 3 unfolds, consider the cumulative horror of life in the Middle Ages. Imagine the sensory overload, the stench of human waste mixed with blood and rotting food, the sound of soldiers screaming, the taste of spoiled rations, and the chill of stone walls that never warmed. Your body aches, your mind reels, and yet life continues because sometimes surviving the horror is the only victory. Could you survive a world designed to erode every sense, to test your limits, to keep you teetering on the edge of despair? Yet, amidst the relentless terror, humans found resilience. Communities helped each other. Knowledge was passed discreetly, and some individuals defied the odds. Their stories remind us that even in the darkest times, courage, cunning, and sheer will could carve out slivers of survival. Could you embody that rare spark, that instinctive drive to keep moving forward, even when every element of life screams surrender? The psychological impact of these punishments, sieges, and daily horrors left marks that survived long after the individual was gone. Fear, superstition, and trauma shaped communities, laws, and even future generations. Nightmares weren't just personal, they were woven into the culture. Stories of torture and punishment circulated not merely as entertainment, but as moral instruction and warning. Could you survive knowing that your actions, or misfortune, could haunt your family, your village, or even your descendants for decades? In conclusion, the medieval world was a crucible designed to test every aspect of human endurance. Punishments were engineered not just to end life, but to terrify, to instruct, and to dominate. Survival required more than strength, it demanded cunning, resilience, and a hardened mind. Modern comforts have shielded us from the everyday horrors that medieval people faced. They lived, suffered, and sometimes died under conditions that make our struggles seem trivial. Could you survive even a fraction of what they endured, when the price of failure was agony or death? The lesson? Life in the Middle Ages was a constant battle not against mythical monsters, but against the relentless, real horrors of a world without mercy. From the wreck to the battlefield, from starvation to disease, each day demanded fortitude beyond what we can imagine today. And while a few stories of survival exist, they are exceptions, not the rule. Most fell victim to circumstances that were entirely out of their control. As you reflect on this, consider the fragility of modern life. The comforts we take for granted: hospitals, clean water, stable food supply, legal protections are shields against horrors that shaped centuries of human history. The Middle Ages were a world where punishment was more than a consequence. It was a spectacle, a deterrent, and a testament to human cruelty and endurance. Could you survive in such a world where even safe days were fraught with unseen dangers, and death or worse waited around every corner? The chronicles of medieval punishments remind us that history is not always about kings, castles, or battles. It is about the human experience under pressure, the extremes of suffering, and the ways in which people navigated a world designed to crush them. And as terrifying as this history is, it is also compelling, a stark reminder that survival is an achievement, and the courage in the face of unimaginable horror is timeless. Could you survive the Middle Ages? Or would the weight of relentless cruelty, disease, and despair break your body and spirit long before the final bell tolls?